Follow up on that for me. Why is a corporation a citizen under this way of thinking?
It's a citizen because it has a need to represent its views. Corporations are like citizens in that they do have rights and they do need to be protected under the law and judged under the law. So if we were to hold them to these standards but not give them the same rights as a citizen, that'd be a sort of double standard that would be equivocally unfair.
In the social contract, in Rousseau's social contract, he talks about the general will of citizens and how citizens come together to form a general will. Coming together to form general wills in the idea that you have the same ideas and you represent the ideas of a group. Having this idea of this group representation within a corporation can be seen that these corporations deserve the same general will rights as a group of citizens would.
Let's move on. Thank you.
Since children are subject to the law, since children are certainly citizens, why do they not have the right to vote?
Well, this can look at the idea of civic education. And at such a young age, you simply haven't lived enough and gone to enough school to receive this civic education, which is an important part in the voting process and the rights process.
Thomas Jefferson writes in a letter to a personal friend about how the only way a democracy can function is if we have a civically educated and a group that are passionate enough about their beliefs. As children, we haven't developed our beliefs or developed a sort of civic knowledge that would make us a very good voting class.
Following that logic, then, it would seem as if the founders had established an aristocracy of, in their world, white, adult, land-owning males, and even in the 21st century, a very limited aristocracy that deprives other citizens of representation. Is that a valid argument?
It is a valid argument. I would argue that it's not an aristocracy that they were trying to set up, but rather an oligarchy. Many times the average person has a sort of negative connotation with the term oligarchy, but really it's a rule of the best. And they really tried to establish what's best for the most number of people.
And I would argue that in the framers' situation, they were fairly generous to how they allowed how they allowed the qualifications to be less to more people. How they allowed there to be less qualifications to vote than they necessarily had to, because they were the elite class when the union was formed, and they could have advocated for high qualifications for voting, except they didn't. And although they did not, a large percentage of the population was excluded from the right to vote. At this time period, it wouldn't have been socially acceptable for them to suggest that all men, even slaves, would vote. So, in order to please the majority of the people, they needed to use this technique.
As you look at the second bullet point with respect to Federalist 39, is Madison addressing the forming of a constitution in your view, or is he talking about the execution of public policy? In other words, is it important that a constitution be derived from the great body of society, or is it important that in making public policy the great body of society have the opportunity to participate?
I would say he was talking about both, in the sense that the Constitution is for the people and will direct how these policies are enacted. And in that sense, they should be derived from the great body of the people, but then the people have to further be involved to help it be executed.
So, actually, historically, and compare with Rome, was the Constitution of the United States derived from the great body of the society?
Factually, no. It was created by a landed aristocracy, as you've pointed out, but I believe that it followed a basic social contract theory, and that it was in the consent of the governed, and it was the consent of the governed and the consent of the people to be governed under this. If the people really didn't like this, then they could have had just another American Revolution and just another Civil War.
However, comparing it to Rome, the United States Constitution was much more efficient, because in the Roman system, the only written down laws they had were procedural laws in the 12 tables. And at no point did they ever write down any of the limits, which there were limits on certain, or the functions of different offices. So I believe that the United States Constitution is more efficient, and it safeguards the ideas of the citizens and the rights of the citizens, because it does describe the limits on the people who are representing them.
Do you think that if Madison were alive today, Do you think he'd still believe in Federalist 39 that power is derived from the great body of the people? If you look at electronic polling and the pressure it places on elected officials to carry out the mandate that they were elected on, which could have been 1 or 2 years before the polls come out, do you think this is what he had in mind?
In Federalist 39, he talks about the idea that it is preferable to have a republic that is derived from the great body of citizens, but it will suffice if it is indirect. And we can see this in the next paragraph of the Federalist 39. And we can talk about how it is sufficient to have indirect voting from the people because of respecting legal authority and respecting what we know and how we can form the best government we possibly can.
As technology, you brought up the point about technology and electronic polls. As technology seems to be expanding, we see some democracies in Europe, especially Switzerland, getting to more direct legislative process. And in Colorado, for example, we have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, where the referendum and where taxes, if were taxes to increase in an inverse or in a not proportional relation to how much the revenue is increasing, the people have to directly vote on that bill. And we see that as technology is increasing, the people are getting more and more of a direct voice in government. And that might not necessarily be exactly what the framers, especially the Federalists, wanted.